We've got some big names that are returning to the sport as expected. We will start with the news, Cobb, that came down a little while ago, a little more than an hour ago, I guess, at this point, and that's Jaxson Robinson is going to go play for Kentucky. Now, this is not a stunner in that Jaxson Robinson was rumored to be likely to commit to Kentucky if indeed he opted out of the NBA draft process. What's interesting about this is, as Cobb well knows, and if Kentucky fans watching live or listening after the fact or watching after the fact are aware of this, Jaxson Robinson opted not to make his decision publicly known in advance of the deadline. He just privately submitted the paperwork that he was withdrawing, which was required by the NCAA in order to be eligible for next season. And then he broke the news by telling my buddy Jeff Borzello at ESPN that he was out of the draft. He did this more than 12 hours after the fact. He said, I'm out, and I'm going to go play for Mark Pope at Kentucky. Jaxson Robinson was the Big 12 Sixth Man of the Year. He averaged 14 points last season, shot nearly 36% from beyond the arc. He is the 12th scholarship player for Kentucky under Pope. I think that staff is going to take a look at the landscape over the next week and determine whether or not they want to chase a 13th player. Kentucky might end up with just 12. 13 is still on the table, I'm told. But it's a good get. It's a big get. I've got thoughts on where Kentucky should be ranked now in real time here. GP's not here because he also now has an obligation. So the way that our weeks balanced out here, we're kind of split up. But happy to have Cobb involved here. What are your thoughts on Jaxson Robinson to Kentucky? Where did you have him? Do you have him ranked in your players in the portal for this offseason? And what should Kentucky fans feel about getting another relatively known player? It's not like he was an out-and-out star, but he certainly was a big contributor on a BYU team that for the majority of last season was ranked top 20 at KenPom.
Yeah, I think he can go out and get you buckets, which is something that Kentucky roster has needed. They've got a lot of productive guys who have played a ton of college basketball, but Jaxson Robinson was the leading scorer for BYU last season. So I think he had some offensive punch to that team. And he's fringe in terms of rankable for me. I mean, I have the top 80 ranked, and I need to go through there now that a lot of these guys have made their decisions and made their commitments. These rosters and their hierarchies are coming into focus, which may warrant some shuffling in the transfer ranking. So Jaxson Robinson is not in there now, but depending on the type of role that Mark Pope envisions for him, there's a scenario where he ends up being one of the most impactful transfers of this cycle, because whether he's the sixth man again or whether he starts, there's a decent chance that he's one of the three leading scorers for Kentucky going into next year. So, yeah, big time get. And now you got 6 guys, Matt, on this Kentucky team who are going to be using their 5th and final season of eligibility. So, and then you got a 7th in Ansley Almanor from Fairleigh Dickinson, who he doesn't have the COVID year, but next season will be his last. So they're going to be turning over that roster again this time next year. But you got to get old, and at Kentucky, the expectation is that you win right out of the gate. So I understand why Mark Pope has gone with this experience first mantra with the way he's built the roster.
Same wavelength, Cobb. We didn't talk about this pre-show, but this was something I was going to bring up for you. It is intriguing to me that Pope and the staff have opted to go in on this theory, because they're going to have a relatively similar rebuild a year from now. We'll see how this goes. And obviously, in terms of having players with only 1 year of eligibility left, that is a stark contrast from what they did under Calipari for so many years there. Robinson's a pretty big get. For a quick refresher, though, here's Kentucky's roster right now. You got Robinson from BYU, Amari Williams from Drexel, who started 32 games last season, averaged double digits, 12.2 points, 7.8 rebounds. Lamont Butler from San Diego State, again, started every single game for San Diego State last season, and he will be a key defensive presence, perimeter defender. I know that staff is hopeful that he can establish himself as a top 10 defensive player in the country, on the perimeter at least. We'll see if they can get there. Otega Owe from Oklahoma, another key defensive presence, although he did average double figures as well. Andrew Carr, I think the hope is that Andrew Carr can be Dalton Connect light and really be the piece that unlocks the offense there. He comes from Wake Forest, where he averaged 13.5 a game and almost 7 rebounds. Also, someone who started every single game last season. Brandon Garrison is a transfer from Oklahoma State. He's the guy who came practically in the cover of darkness, and his commitment for a minute made Kentucky fans wonder if they were going to lose Amari Williams, but lo and behold, he reaffirmed his commitment there. Kobe Brea, long range sniper from Dayton, obviously was not a starter, and I would presume that he'll probably come off the bench again, but he'll be a big plug-and-play guy there. And then Kirk Kriisa, who started every game at West Virginia, that he was able to play when he wasn't hurt, and previously at Arizona. There's a lot of big names in there from a transfer perspective, and then you've got guys who are incoming in-state talents that are going to be there for probably more than Travis Perry, Colin Chandler, really good players that they're going to be pieces that are used. And I think one of the key things for Pope and his staff is to see how they're going to be able to use all of these pieces. But it's a pretty good roster. I would say looking up and down at this, they're definitely top 25. Now, Parrish hasn't updated his ranking since, Jaxson Robinson committed just a minute ago, but he did not have Kentucky in his rankings prior to this. I suspect he will whenever he does update that, and probably slot UK somewhere in the 20 to 25 range. If you wanted to say Kentucky was even, I don't know if I'd go top 15, but anywhere in that 17-ish range to 25, I think it's validated. Would you agree with the amount of experience, and not just age, but gameplay experience, starting experience with this roster, Cobb, that Pope's been able to get in there? Are you in like I am on top 20-ish range for this roster heading into next season, or are you still wait and see and don't think they should be ranked?
Top 20 on the merits of talent for sure. I think he did as well as he could, considering there's not a single player returning from last year. And as of now, not a single player on the Kentucky roster for next season will have played with anyone else who's on that roster. So on the merits of talent, it's a top 20 roster. But I think Mark Pope is going to have a really difficult task of blending them all together, defining roles, just getting the chemistry up to the standard that you need. When you look at Alabama returning potentially the national preseason player of the year, maybe, and Mark Sears with some other key contributors, and you go around the SEC, and there's a lot of teams that bring some really good players back, that have that cohesion, that have that foundation, who have coaches that are well established in the SEC. So from a roster standpoint, Mark Pope's done about as well as he could. It's just, does it all click a year one? That's going to be tough. So, I see them probably as a middle of the pack SEC team. And if you're a middle of the pack SEC team, that probably means you're a fringe top 25 team.
Yeah, they also have Trent Noah, I believe. I mentioned Chandler and Perry. Trent Noah, who previously was committed to South Carolina, he's going to be in there as well. We have a poll up right now, by the way. Robinson isn't one of the options, but if you're watching, feel free to vote. We'll get to the results later in the show. But which decision from this week is going to be the most consequential and significant for next season? Caleb Love back at Arizona, Caravan back at UConn, Mark Sears back at Bama, or other? Jaxson Robinson just isn't in that class. He was the leading scorer at BYU, and he's going to be a big-time player, but I don't think he's quite on that level. But I do think it's a pretty significant get, and I also kind of like the low-key way he did it, kind of similar to DJ Wagner, and I know that was talked about on the show earlier this week with GP and KB, but there's nothing wrong with players publicizing what they're going to do. It's social media. I'm not complaining whatsoever, but it is oddly refreshing when you have players that just simply aren't going to need that. I had reached out. I'd been in contact with the Wagner family and was told he probably wouldn't be publicizing it, his commitment to Arkansas. And then I checked back in again, whenever it was, Saturday, Sunday, I can't remember. And I was like, hey, I'm just making sure, he can announce if he wants to announce, but if not, we'll go with it. They're like, no, you can go with it. He is committed to Arkansas. He will not be having any kind of, tailor-made video for social media in any kind of realm. He just made his decision like the way it kind of used to be. So Jaxson Robinson sort of similarly just didn't feel the need to get out ahead of it, while in the process keeping the UK fan base. And I think the Kentucky staff for a minute they're twisting in the wind over whether or not he was truly going to stay in or not. I think it was the right call for him in terms of his potential, his future, and the opportunities that await him, obviously on court and financially at Kentucky. But it's a big get. It's the latest get. We'll see if it's the last get or not for the Wildcats there. It is an intriguing roster. We got someone in the chat saying can't find another roster in the country with better shooting than this Kentucky roster. We'll wait and see on that. Now, Pope's got a really fun, good offense, and there's obviously the expectation that Kentucky is going to be a team similar to last season's team under Calipari, where they are going to want to be putting up 85 or more a night. Hopefully they can get there, and certainly it would be a good thing for college basketball if Kentucky can kind of continue that, being such an entertaining team. But they are not. The idea that Kentucky, because they've got this offensive firepower, they've got these veterans, needs to be ranked in the top 10. I just can't get there yet. I've talked about this particular thing, Cobb, a number of times with coaches over the past 2 months. Putting so many new human beings in a team environment when they have no previous connection, you hope that it works, and you hope that what you're coaching and what you're leading and everything from the top down filters. But there is no guarantee. This goes for Kentucky as much as it goes for mid and low major teams that have had to rebuild and will have 8 new bodies on the roster outside of the forces of their own control, that you get to Christmas time and you just hope that like 4 guys on the roster don't outright can't stand each other. You hope that you avoid that, but the more that you kind of do this stuff, some of these things are just going to be inevitable. Kentucky seemingly has a pretty good group there, and ideally they can compete near the top of the SEC. But you'd agree there are still a handful of teams that are ahead of them, right?
It's going to be funny when KenPom releases in a few months and Kentucky ranks like top 20 in D1 experience and like 350th in minutes continuity, or maybe dead last in minutes continuity, because there is 0 minutes continuity there. So that's going to be an interesting dichotomy there between those two things. And going back to the way these guys announce their decisions, I think my all-time favorite was about a year ago when Ryan Kalkbrenner withdrew from the draft, and he posted on Twitter, and I think it was, "I am returning to Creighton."
Yeah. There was another one 2 years ago. Timmy, I remember it. But they go to social, and Timmy did as well, because I talked to him about it after the fact. He was playing a video game, and he knew the deadline was coming, but eventually he was like, I got to get something out there. And he just went Jordan. He just tweeted, "I'm back." That's all he did. That was how he announced it. So I'm all for entertaining ways of doing it. But shouts to the old heads who don't feel the need to go to social media to promote this stuff. More power to you.